everyone. My name is Emma, and today I'm going to be talking about how intimate relationships form the fabric of society. When we talk about intimate relationships, we tend to think of them as personal affairs pertaining to just ourselves and our partners, and we don't really think about the impact that it can have on people beyond our social circle, let alone on society. In my presentation, I'm going to be analyzing these impacts as well as talking about some theory and some studies that support the theory that I'm going to be discussing. So, intimate relationships can have both positive and negative impacts on people beyond our social circle. So, for example, on the bottom right, there's a couple who looks really happy and healthy, and as we know in previous lecture, people in good quality intimate relationships tend to live longer, healthier lives. Because they're in a healthier relationship, they're likely living healthier lives, which in turn is less of a burden on the healthcare system, and that's beneficial for society as a whole. The couple on the bottom left, however, doesn't look quite as happy, and maybe they're up all night fighting and disrupting their neighbor's sleep. Both of these examples would be considered two ways in which an intimate relationship can have an impact on someone beyond their social circle and on society. So, the textbook explains social control theory as a tool to explain the link between intimate relationships and broader social impacts of someone's actions. And social control theory is this idea that someone's relationship, someone's commitment, someone's values, etc., it encourages them not to break the law or indulge in criminal/delinquent behavior. So, someone using social control theory could look at the dad in this picture and say that he chooses not to break the law because his partner regulates his behavior, or maybe he chooses not to break the law because he's a family and the personal costs and sanctions deter him from breaking the law. But the idea here is that when someone is in an intimate relationship, they're less likely to engage in criminal or delinquent behavior, and there are a few different studies that support this idea of social control. So these two studies here kind of emulate the same idea that substance use and substance abuse decreases when someone enters an intimate relationship and increases when someone dissolves an intimate relationship or just isn't in one in general. So the study by Fleming and colleagues showed that marijuana and alcohol consumption fluctuated with changes in relationship status, and the study by Bachman and colleagues showed that similar trend but with cocaine use. So these two studies here would support the idea of social control theory because it's showing how individuals tend to engage in socially unacceptable behavior when they're not in a relationship and disengage in those respective behaviors when they enter intimate relationships. So this is another study that supports the theory of social control, the study done by Lobb and colleagues. And in this study, they observed 500 males who attended reform school during adolescence for repeated delinquent behavior. And they found that later in their lives, the men who are more likely to be in and stay in a good quality marriage were actually more likely to decrease their criminal behavior. So again, this reinforces that idea of social control, that intimate relationships can help regulate the behaviors of those who are involved, which in the end can be beneficial for society. So kind of switching gears here, we also have to talk about the impacts that divorce has on a society. We know that there are monetary costs that come along with getting a divorce, but there are also societal costs. So sometimes what ends up happening with divorces is one person or even both people end up having to tap into state and federal assistance programs like WIC and EBT. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, it does end up costing taxpayers, which translates to a societal cost. Another cost that we've kind of touched on in previous lecture would be the cost of the children's well-being, if there are even children involved. And as we know, ending a high conflict marriage is good for children in the long term, and ending low conflict marriages tend to not be so good for children in the long term. But overall, the impact that divorces have on children can end up manifesting itself into the intimate relationships that they have as adults. As we've talked about, children from divorced families are 10 to 20% more likely to end up divorcing themselves. In a study done by Sharm in 2006, they found that each divorce cost taxpayers about $30 billion in the form of welfare, childcare, food stamps, etc. In 2005, there were about 1 million divorces, which calculated to be about $30 billion in taxpayer money. I did a quick Google search and found that in 2019, there were about 780,000 divorces, which obviously is lower than 1 million. So that translated to about $23.5 billion. However, 5 states opted not to reveal their divorce statistics, so that number is probably higher. So, with all of this being said, if you're in a terrible marriage, should you get a divorce or should you stick it out for the greater good? Unfortunately, I am not qualified to give sound advice on this matter, but it does raise a good point that needs to be addressed. This information isn't to try and influence someone's thoughts on whether or not they should get a divorce, nor is it to shame anyone who has gotten a divorce. This information is only to show the impacts that intimate relationships have on a society. All relationships, whether they're terrible or amazing, comprise the fabric that is our society. This is the end of my presentation. This is just a slide with the credits to the people who made the pictures and designed the PowerPoint template, but thanks for watching.